Hello and welcome to the Week in Golf. I'm Rod Morrie. Good to have your company as we catch up with happenings around the world of golf. On this episode, we chat in depth to Golf Australia CEO Stephen Pitt, ask Rachel Hetherington 10 questions about the game, and check in with our viral video of the week. First this week, let's take a look at events on the professional tours of the world. We'll kick things off with the PGA Tour in Florida, where the stars came out to play, but the weather didn't. After losing all of Saturday to high winds and heavy rain, the tournament was pushed into a Monday finish where a wild back nine saw several players in with a chance. In the end, three-time major winner Padraig Harrington holed a nail-biting 15-foot birdie putt on the final hole to force a playoff with rookie Daniel Berger. He went on to win with a par at the second hole of sudden death. Robert Allenby and Mark Leishman were the only two Australians in the Honda, but both finished towards the tail of the field. To the European Tour now, and England's Andy Sullivan might be considering a move to South Africa after claiming his second title in that country in as many months. Sullivan shot a final round 66 to win the Joburg Open by 2 shots at the weekend, the trophy sitting nicely along the South African Open trophy he won in January. European Tour rookie Jason Scrivener and former standout amateur Todd Sinnott were the only Australians in the field, but both missed the cut. Scrivener despite a promising opening round, which saw him in a tie for 5th after 18 holes. Turning to women's golf now, and world number 1 Lydia Ko continued her remarkable run this week at the New Zealand Women's Open in Christchurch. The 17-year-old finished 4 shots ahead of West Australian amateur Hannah Green. The victory built on a stunning second round of 11 under par 61, a round which unbelievably started with a bogey. And finally this week we head to Asia, where the LPGA Thailand event dished up a thrilling finish on Sunday. Australian Open runner-up Amy Yang washed away the disappointment of a couple of missed short putts late at Royal Melbourne by running down former world number 1 Stacey Lewis in the final round. The former Australian Ladies Masters champion started the day 1 behind Lewis, but won by 2 thanks to a 3-under final round. Kari Webb was the best of the Australians, climbing to a share of 11th with a final round 67. And watching all of that golf over the last few days pretty intently was PGA member and commentator on the game Larry Canning. And Larry, plenty of action on the course at the Honda Classic in Florida, but a fair bit of action off it as well.
Yeah, that's right, Rod. Yeah, there was a massive storm hit the golf course. All the players were called in. There was lightning and rain. The spectators were also called in. They all went into the clubhouse, but the caddies weren't allowed in there. They had to take solace in a small metal tent. They were stuck towards the back of it because one of the walls were missing. There was rain coming in, and it was just really unpleasant for the poor caddies. The players and even the spectators were fine, but the caddies weren't.
Yeah, plenty of talk about it on social media, of course, Larry, but I suppose this is all part of a deeper issue. The caddies have had a bit of an issue with the PGA Tour in the last couple of months. Yeah.
A guy called Mike Hicks is leading the caddies in a $50 million lawsuit against the PGA Tour, Rod, for restriction of trade. Basically, the bibs they wear, the caddies wear, have the sponsors of the tournament's name on it, and they're encouraged, in fact, coerced is the word that Mike uses, into wearing these bibs because they can't have anything else that their sponsors might want on their shirts or their own bibs. So, in other words, the bibs that they're wearing, the caddy bibs, which are a very important part of the whole tournament setup, have to have the sponsor of the tournament's name and not the caddy sponsor's name. Now, this is restriction of trade, according to Mike Hicks, and as I said, $50 million lawsuit, and it's happening. It's a real thing.
Not chump change. Larry, you've been a player. You've played on the tour. In your eyes as a player, does it sound fair enough? The caddies do seem to get almost second-rate treatment at times.
Caddies get treated really badly, Rod, and except for my old caddy, who in fact, old is the wrong term, who I actually finished up sleeping with and married. A lovely bloke. Now, I'm not only joking. She's a lovely lady. Her name is Sandra. She caddied for me for a while. But, yes, I did get a bit of a look into what it's like caddying. I've done a bit of caddying myself as well. And, it's a no-win situation being a caddy. You're thrown around like a rag doll at times. You're raking bunkers. You're reading putts. You're trying to calm your player down. They do get a tough, and this is definitely a legitimate case for them. I don't know how it's going to pan out. Yeah, the caddies are really, and you saw that at the Honda Classic. I mean, if they're not allowed in the clubhouse and the spectators are, well, that's an injustice.
Yeah. Well, if they think they've got a tough, Larry, they should talk to your wife who has had to caddy for you. That is a bad deal. Thanks for your time today.
Good on you, Rod.
In the wake of last week's Australian Women's Open, the Week in Golf was lucky enough to sit down with Golf Australia CEO Stephen Pitt for an in-depth chat about all things golf. With the headlines about Lydia Ko's victory bouncing all around the world, We started by asking in part one of the interview about the importance of the Australian Opens to the game more broadly. I want to start with the Opens. I know that planning for next year's Open starts the day after this year's Open finishes. Just some thoughts about the two Opens, the two National Opens we've just had, and their importance to the game more broadly.
I guess the reason they're so important to us is they're a flagship for Australian golf and they help promote the game. We've just finished the Women's Open, and one of the reasons we invest into that is it helps create role models, it gives our players somewhere to play, but probably most importantly, it helps inspire new girls in particular into golf, and that's the reason, the major reason why we invest into them.
You see it on the course with the young people that are out there, don't you, with the wide eyes, looking at the Kari Webbs and the Lydia Ko's, saying, that's what I want to be one day.
Yeah, absolutely, and you see it when they want to get autographs and just want to interact in person with their stars.
The men obviously has been in Sydney for a number of years. I think 2015 was, last I heard, was officially the last year in Sydney. The women obviously in Melbourne. Is that likely to stay the same for the future? Is there any movement in that area as yet?
Well, actually, both of our contracts with state governments end in 2015, so we're in the process of finalising or looking at a new agreement with the Women's Open. In terms of the Australian Open, the event in Sydney in November will be the last one of that deal.
Of course, the infrastructure involved in staging those events, there's probably a lot of golf fans don't understand just what's required, do they?
Yeah, there's not that many golf courses around the country that can host Australian Opens just because of what you need in terms of access and parking and village, and then we've always been, I guess, very particular in wanting the best golf courses in the country to host our Open Championships, which we've been able to do over a period of time.
The market for professional golf, of course, Golf Australia is the head of the amateur body, but the Opens are professional events. The market for professional golf is getting more difficult right around the world. Most tours, apart from probably the US tour, have had their struggles. There's a lot of people who have suggested perhaps we should think about co-sanctioning, particularly our men's events, with some of the European events, and perhaps move back to a February sort of calendar. Are they the sorts of things that Golf Australia thinks about? Would the Open be a candidate for something like that at any stage?
Potentially, but probably not likely. I guess you've got to work out what you get out of co-sanctioning with tours. From our experience, one of the great things co-sanctioning with LPGA around the Women's Open, that's a tour that really brings its best players. You don't have to pay extensive appearance fees outside of that. So I guess co-sanctioning, you want that tour to be able to deliver its best players. So that's always going to be a prerequisite of co-sanctioning arrangements. I guess the formula that we've had, if we're talking about the Men's Open, is having a really strong Australian field with some top-line players. And if you look at what we've had over the last few years...
2011?
Yeah, exactly. I guess we had 9 of the US team, coupled with our great Australian players, from Adam and Jason and Robert and Jeff and Stuart and Greg Chalmers and John Sendon and Mark Leishman and on and on and on. So it's been a very deep field in that sense, and that's worked really, really well for us. We've seen the Australian Open go from strength to strength. We've had a great partner with Emirates, who've been just a fantastic naming rights sponsor.
As one of the oldest trophies in the game, it's quite a responsibility to be in charge of the Australian Open, isn't it?
Yeah,
I'm sure you take it seriously.
Yeah, absolutely you do. It's a really nice thing to spend 10 minutes or so looking at the names on the trophy, and there's this patch there that sort of alternates between Nicholas and Player, and then you throw in Thompson and Jack Newton and Greg Norman, and it's just an amazing trophy in terms of the history of the Australian Open. And
we'll have part 2 of that chat with Stephen Pitt on next week's show. Rachel Hetherington is one of the best women's players that Australia has ever produced. 8 times a winner on the LPGA Tour, 3 of those in playoffs over the legendary Annika Sorenstam. Rachel hung up the sticks from tournament golf in 2010, but this summer made a mini comeback at some of Australia's tournaments. We caught up with Rachel to ask her 10 questions about the game.
It was my first par at Billawheeler Golf Club. I didn't know it was a 4. I didn't know it was a par, and my dad told me, oh yeah, you've had a par. I'm like, oh, okay, cool. Ooh, did you know I'm old? So my memory is not great, no. I remember the first time I broke 80, I'm fairly sure it was at Ipswich Golf Club, because I can remember walking back to the putting green and thinking, yeah, I've done it, I've achieved it. 70, I'm not too sure, but Ipswich Golf Club is where I played a lot of my junior golf, and so I have a lot of good memories there. Oh, I think I got to scratch. It's probably a hole-in-one that I made at the Sybase Classic in New York on the LPGA. Would have been 04, 05, somewhere around there. There was a short par 3 and the pin was tucked left and there's a big tree guarding the left side of the green. And when the girls found out that I holed it, they said, oh, that was pretty lucky. There's no way you meant to bend it around the tree. And I went, yeah, I wanted to bend it around the tree. It worked. I think any time I'm on a golf course, you get to that point where it's a beautiful day, it's sunny, particularly in the afternoons is a great time to play golf. It's a pretty cool place to be, any golf course. The Evian Masters was my favourite to play. Yeah, we're really spoilt there. Attitude. When I was 18, would have been driving range. Now at 42, it's chipping and putting. Probably routine, pre-shot routine and setup. 3-wood, sand wedge, and 7-iron.
What do you love?
3-wood.
And if you're in Sydney this week, you're in luck because Rachel and a host of other top professionals will be playing at the Oatlands Golf Club in the Women's New South Wales Open. The tournament starts on Friday and entry is free. Also, just before we go this week, Australia's biggest amateur golf competition, the Lexus Cup, got underway yesterday. If you haven't already, check out the Lexus Cup at www.lexuscup.com.au. And now to our video of the week, and we go back to Florida, where after all the delays with the weather and the difficulties getting the tournament finished, Ian Poulter came up with an unmentionable in the final round.
Conservatively, and that's probably way right.
This is an 8-iron and it's a dead shank.
Wow.
Way right.
Oh,
Takes a hop off the path.
You gotta be kidding me.
Just after we showed a graphic how he led the field in greens and regulation, proximity to hole, that happens.
That is amazing. Well, he's dressing on the toe of the club and just a flat shank you.
Man.
And I think as golfers, we can all agree the less said about that, the better. That's all for this week. See you next week on The Week in Golf.